Welcome to the Call to Meat Scotland podcast, where we bring you the latest insights from across the Scottish red meat sector, from the public body that works on its behalf. I'm Claire Taylor, your host for today's episode. Join us as we dive into market trends, brand communications and industry development projects in relation to Scotland's red meat sector, featuring experts, guests, farmers and stakeholders. Together, we'll explore the key facts and perspectives shaping our sector, keeping you informed and engaged with the ever-evolving landscape of the red meat industry. Welcome back to the QMS podcast. It's a busy time of year on farms right across the country, with lambing and calving well underway, so we've got a really practical and insightful episode lined up for you. I'm delighted to be joined by two leading voices in animal health and nutrition, Lorna and Fiona Crowden. This conversation is part 2 of a short series expanding on the learnings from the Building Better Beef event which took place in Thainston, as we look at post-lambing and calving strategies, managing health and nutrition challenges, and taking a more proactive approach to setting systems up for success in the months and years ahead. I also catch up with Abby Tong to explore the latest consumer trends shaping the red meat sector. We touch on lamb's rising popularity, why beef retail prices remain high, and what consumers are likely to be buying this Easter. But first, I spoke with Kate Rao to hear what unfolded at QMS's Future Thinking on Red Meat conference. Welcome back to the podcast, Kate. And at the time that we're recording this, we're now a week on from QMS's Future Thinking on Red Meat conference. It took place on the 10th of March. That's about 6 years since you had your first conference. How did it all go down? What were some of the key outcomes from the day?
Yeah, it was a brilliant day, actually. It was really, really good. I know the team were all a bit nervous, 6 years since the last time we did it. There were very few people on the team who'd actually been at the conference 6 years ago, so it was quite new to a lot of people, but what a fantastic job they did. It was a really, really good day. We were packed out. We had people there from every part of the supply chain, so farmers right through to retailers. There were some tables full of retailers and everybody in between. Our gold sponsor was the Institute of Auctioneers, but we were also supported by some processors, by Scotland Food and Drink, by National Beef Association. So, it was right across the supply chain, and it was such a good day. The team had done a really good job of getting external speakers in, but also doing some speaking themselves. So, for example, we had a session where we talked about marketing. Leslie Ann Gray from Kantar gave us some marketing details and marketing information for what consumers are saying out there. And then our own Emma Heath talked about how QMS are responding to that data and how we're doing our marketing. And so we had things like that right across the day, which were really, really good. We had Dr. Phil Hadley, who kicked us off. He's from the International Meat Secretariat, and he gave us a sort of global picture of the red meat sector, which really started the day off well. We had the whole Scottish Red Meat Resilience Group on the stage, so I think that was maybe 13 or 14 of us on the stage, which Sarah managed to compare really, really well. We all talked for just a couple of minutes and then she took questions, so that was really, really good. And it was really good to show everybody that was there the sort of collaboration between all the groups on the Red Meat Resilience Group. So that was really excellent. And of course we had Mary Goujon there as the keynote speaker, and that was her last industry speech, so that was a bit kind of emotional as well. When she went away, she waved goodbye, and that may well be the last time many people come across her in that capacity. So yeah, it was a really, really good day.
Oh, it sounded like a fantastic conference, and you'd got over 250 people attending, and yeah, just seeing lots of the headlines coming out of it. You mentioned like Leslie Ann, who's giving some of the forecast. I think right now, we'd spoken a bit before this, Kate, as well, some of the opportunities that are sitting there for producers. What were some of the kind of positives and opportunities that people took away from the day?
So the big one that Leslie Ann spoke about, but actually other people mentioned throughout the day, was the rising use of weight loss drugs, so the GLP-1s. And it was really interesting. The number of people who are taking these drugs and have started just in the past year is enormous. I think she said there was 1 million people in the UK who are taking them, and another 3 million at least who are thinking about it. So what those drugs do is they reduce your appetite, and not just for food. Apparently, it's for things like alcohol as well. They reduce what you want to consume. But what that means is that you have to make sure that you have a really balanced and probably high protein diet, or else you're going to get muscle loss. So it's actually a really good news story for high quality red meat. People are moving away from buying things that are ready made, and they're buying high quality meat and making things themselves. But as well, the retailers have already picked up on this, and they're already selling sort of whole meals that are GLP-1 compliant or GLP-1 adaptable, or whatever their terminology is. So it's definitely something that's on the rise, and it does represent a real opportunity. The other positive that really came out of it was actually the potential for pork. There's a real potential for pork when you put it up against chicken. So chicken is obviously a lean meat that people know how to cook with. But actually, what I didn't know, pork is actually more nutrient dense than chicken. It's about the same price in the shops, and you can do the same sort of things with it. It's very versatile. You know, you can put it with sauces and things. So a lot of the pig sector that were there, although they're not in a good place price-wise at the minute, the potential there is also quite exciting if we can manage to grasp some of those opportunities.
Oh, that's so interesting, Kate. And I guess it also quite fitting a year on, really, from some of the conversations around Meeting Our Potential campaign, the opportunities for producers out there. So it's great that so many of those themes overlapped at the conference. But of course, we're in March now, Kate. I know you're about to start lambing, but you've also come to the end of some really busy engagements with QMS. Can you share a bit about that as well?
Yeah, so way back in October, we kicked off, again, along with the Red Meat Resilience Group and others in the sector, we kicked off a series of meetings out and about around the country where we invited politicians, so councillors, MSPs, MPs, candidates, along to on-farm or other meetings to hear from us and from all our partners about agriculture and how important it is. So I think we kicked off in Linlithgow. We've been to Tain, Orkney, Mull, Stranraer, down in the borders in Duns, and last week we were in Blairgowrie, and then just Friday past we were at Glasgow City College, where we focused on sort of butchery rather than the farming end of the supply chain. So it's been an amazing series of events. We've had people from all the different parliaments, all the different parts of the political system, MPs, lots of MSPs, lots of candidates some of whom had never been on a farm before, so it was really good to introduce them to that, and lots of councillors. So what's been really good is that there's obviously lots of different challenges, and sometimes it's difficult for us to know whose challenges whose, you know what I mean? So you go somewhere, you talk about immigration or labour shortage, but if there's no MPs there, then it's all very interesting, but none of the others can do anything about it. So it's good if you've got an MP there for that. Also, there's talk about agricultural policy, and that's at Scottish Government level. So you need MSPs or MSP candidates to listen to that. And then you've got discussion about things like school meals and education, and that's at a local authority level. So it's been really good to get out and just get all those conversations going. One of the things that really has come home to me is that we've got lots of shared challenges. There's lots of things that affect all of us, but there's also an awful lot of things that are really at a very regional level, and you don't really pick up on those until you go there. We were on Mull one week and we were on Orkney the next week, and as a mainlander, you sometimes think, oh, the islands, and you just lump them all together. But it was so interesting hearing how different the challenges were on Mull than they were in Orkney. They were completely different. So you've kind of got to get out and hear these things. And I've been so lucky to be able to go to every one of these and hear all those conversations and kind of form that picture in my mind. So it's been really, really interesting. I think it's been really, really successful. All the people who've come along have thanked us. We've had some lovely emails saying how much they got out of it. So hopefully it's done a really good job to put agriculture front and foremost into a lot of their thinking.
It sounds like you've had an incredibly busy 5 months, Kate. You've been all over the country and all these cross-government conversations sound so fascinating. But now obviously you're going to be tied to the lambing shed for a little bit. And obviously when this does come out, you're going to be right in the thick of it. And just before you go, can you just share a little bit about how you're feeling, how things are looking for you?
Yeah, it's always the same in the run up to lambing. It's the anticipation that it's dread. Once you're into it, it's absolutely fine. I love lambing time, but it's just that 2 or 3 weeks beforehand where you don't have everything done that you want to have done, and you've got this hard deadline that you have to get it all organised for. So yeah, I'm still in that stage at the minute. By the time this goes out, we'll be in it, and it'll be great. The only thing is, I just get achier and achier and slightly slower every single year as I get older. And yeah, I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to it, but yeah, hoping that I don't end up with really bad knees afterwards.
Okay, best of luck with lambing. I'm sure next time we get you on, you can give an update on how everything's gone. But thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Claire.
Now let's hear from Abby Tong on how consumer behaviour is shaping up this Easter. It's great to have you back on the podcast, Abby. Can I begin by asking what consumer trends you've been observing recently?
Yes, of course. I think I'll just give you a bit update on the primary red meat sector and performance in Scotland. I think that would be very interesting. Based on the data from Word Panel by Numerator for the 12-week ending 22nd of February, and we have seen total spending on red meat in Scotland has continued to rise. It's up 12.8% year on year. Well, that's mainly still driven by price inflation. And also the spending growth was recorded for beef and lamb. We're talking about beef increased by 14% and lamb increased by 22%. But here is very interesting. For beef, was still driven by price inflation. While for lamb, is mainly driven by volume increase. So that's quite interesting. Well, for the primary pork sector in Scotland, we have saw a spending decline of 1.5%. So thinking about despite there's a very high price inflation level of primary beef in Scotland, it remains at the heart of a Scottish household's buying habits. It accounts for nearly 67% of the total red meat volume. Well, for lamb, we continue to see a very standout performing with the lamb steak volume surging by nearly 91%. So we're talking about it's double the size of the volume sold compared to last year. So it could reflect the consumers' appetite for premium cuts. So I think for the more affordable pork and pork mince volumes, it increased by 10.8% in Scotland. So overall, I think the demand for this quality red meat in Scotland held strong, while the Scottish consumers appear to be less affected by price inflation than across GB, highlighting the resilience of Scotland's red meat market.
I think I have to pull straight into lamb, Abby. I mean, those volume increases that you've talked about there. I mean, what is particularly driving this, and why is Scotland performing and outperforming the likes of GB in this area? What's changing?
According to Word Panel by Numerator data, we could obviously see the penetration level of lamb has been increased by 14% year on year. It's basically meaning more shoppers were attracted into the category, buying more lamb. While in GB, and it's quite different in terms of their growth. In GB, the main driver is more volume per trip, but we haven't seen more new shoppers into the category. So with this, I think with this Easter coming up, and we are likely to see another up peak for lamb, especially for lamb roasting. So we will wait and see. It's quite interesting to see what's happening.
I mean, that's obviously great to hear. There's going to be that uptake, hopefully, and particularly roast. Is lamb becoming more of a traditional go-to for consumers, or are there other contenders that you're going to see taking that spot?
I think lamb, especially the lamb leg roasting, is definitely a traditional go-to for the consumers for Easter. So if you have the chart for a sales chart of lamb leg roasting, Easter is definitely the biggest spike throughout the year for lamb leg roasting. So about the other cuts, I think, for example, we have seen beef roasting, some like specs, but that's far less comparable to the level we have seen for the lamb leg roastings. But considering this year and the beef price, is quite high, the inflation is really high, we probably won't expect a very big sale like a spike for the beef roastings. But however, you never know, because from this Christmas like performance, we have seen the traditional roasting gain momentum. So the same thing may repeat for the Easter, and we will see like the sales spike for both roastings. You never know, but it's very interesting to look at.
I remember last time we had you on, Abby, we were talking about, I guess, the go-tos over the Christmas period. And I guess one calendar event that we've missed is Valentine's Day. I mean, in terms of consumer behaviour on Valentine's Day, what are you seeing around meat choices then?
For Valentine's week and for the romantic week, it's always go-to is the beef steak. So we have seen the beef, the Valentine's week remain the biggest spike in beef steak sales throughout the year. This year reaching a new high of 3 million pounds in Scotland during the Valentine's week, according to data from NIQ. So when we compare the week before and after the Valentine's week, there is still a sales spike for beef steak, reflecting this position, beef steak's position as the center of the romantic occasion. However, I think the spike is not as big as last year. But if you look at the tiers, the premium steaks were driving spending up. That's basically meaning people are trading up to premium steaks for the occasion. However, this premium range share only represents 24% of total beef steak sold in the country. And also another thing that I think is worth to mention is that even though we see more spending on premium beef steak, but we have seen more promotions promoted premium beef steak bought this year. So it could reflect that actually consumers' savvy shopping habit still persists, and price continue to be the key factor driving shoppers into the category.
If we stay on beef for a second, you said it at the top of the interview that beef inflation, we've been hearing the levels are beginning to soften a little bit, but we're seeing actually those retail prices are remaining exceptionally high. I mean, I guess how long is that? Do you think that's likely to continue, Abby? And is that disconnect between how inflation is dropping, yet the retail prices are staying high? What's behind that?
I think it's a really interesting question, but also it's a hard question, especially considering what's happening right now for what's happening in the Middle East. This conflict has already been driving this oil and energy prices going up. Will definitely have some pressure our retail prices for all categories. It's not only beef or lamb, pork, for all categories are having impact. Speaking of price, it's all about this balance between supply and demand. So when we're talking about its the supply side, the national cattle population is still declining. That long-term trend naturally will push price up simply because there is less stock available. But interestingly, in short term, from beginning of this year, a bit different. Since the start of this year, the kill number in Scotland have been significantly higher than the 2025 average. So that basically means more more cattle are coming through this kill, and we have more supplies in the short term, and that can help ease the price down. Now flipping over to the demand side, demand, as I stated in the beginning, has stayed strong. People are still buying beef, but as the price keep rising, you're probably going to see more shoppers trading down, or they could at some point, some tipping point, shoppers may stop buying beef because they can't afford it anymore. So when that happens, retailers will often have to bring price back down to keep consumers continue to engage in the category. These are both factors we have to think about.
It's interesting, Abby, because you were saying when we talked about Valentine's Day and volumes of steak, and you were saying that people are they're buying fewer but more premium steaks. But then obviously when you were talking about pork earlier, that's seen an increase in volume. And is that a value driven choice from consumers because it's cheaper? I'm just thinking, following along your line of thought there.
Well, I think it's not only because of the value driven choice for consumers of pork. It's also a versatile kind of a protein, and it can be used in many cuisines and dishes. Thinking about what's popular currently, some Asian pork, some dishes, and it's all very popular. And thinking about it's street food can be very popular, and quite often they use pork mince or pork strips into their ingredients. So that's very, very interesting. Plus, the pork contains a very high protein. And, for the young people nowadays, they see primary red meat as a very natural source of high quality protein. So that will naturally attract more shoppers into the category.
It's great to hear consumers are being more creative in their recipes and obviously utilising more cuts and all these different meats as well. But I guess just before you go, Abby, can I just ask, what are you going to be paying close attention to in the months ahead? What should we, as consumers, be paying attention to as well?
I think first of all, it's the Easter is coming up, and it's a very big celebration, occasion for the shoppers. I think for these big events like what we have seen from the Christmas, and the shoppers that continue to celebrate with traditional cuisines like the lamb leg roasting, so that will continue for the shoppers and for the retailers and also other butchers. They are trying the best to help to save money for the shoppers. So looking out for the promotions, and you will still can enjoy your holidays at the same time. You could save some money.
Amazing, Abby. Thank you so much as ever for your insights. Look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you.
For our final segment on the podcast today, we're continuing the conversation I had last month with Emily Grant and Neil McGowan, where we were discussing how to build more efficient and future-ready beef and lamb systems. And this month, I'm delighted to be joined by two new guests, Fiona Crowden and Lorna Shaw, who are going to delve into questions around animal health and nutrition. Fiona and Lorna, welcome to the podcast. Can I begin by asking you both to introduce yourself to our listeners? I'll come to you first, Lorna.
Thanks for having us along. I am Lorna Shaw, so I work as a ruminant nutritionist with SEC Consulting based out of their Perth consulting office, predominantly working with beef and sheep farmers across the entire Scotland, and then have quite a large support role within the SEC and SRUC wider network, assisting vet services, research, and consultants along the way as well. So quite a nice varied role, also from a family farm down in the border. So actually that's what I am doing this week, is lambing. So quite a nice varied role going forward.
Well, we've got you both at a very busy time. I'm aware Lorna and Fiona both have so many different commitments, and they've given their time to the podcast because this is early March we're recording, but this will be going out in April. Fiona, can you introduce to our listeners too, please?
Hi Claire. Yeah, I worked as a mixed vet in Caithness and Angus for 17 years before taking a job as a veterinary investigation officer, working basically as at the vet lab, doing postmortems, investigating disease with SRUC. In my spare time, I do a bit of rifle shooting, and I do a lot of rifle coaching, and so I have an interest in kind of performance planning and how that relates to kind of health planning and animal health. So I put two hats on sometimes, and yeah, enjoy both of those roles.
Well, that'll be really interesting to hear a little bit more about that, Fiona, shortly. And of course, this podcast, I've said it already, is a continuation. It's a bit of a two-part series from QMS. and it's expanding on the learnings of the Building Better Beef Supply Chain event, which took place in Thainston earlier this year. And we're hoping to have broader conversations about some of the key learnings for beef and lamb farmers for those who were unable to attend the event. Lorna and Fiona, you were both in attendance in Thainston. Can you share a bit about your involvement in the event and what you were talking about on the day? I'll come to you again first, Lorna.
Yeah, so my involvement in the Building Better Beef event at Thainston was that I was one of the speakers in the morning and early afternoon breakout sessions. For my session, I very much focused on finishing beef nutrition and how we can try and focus on getting beef to a better finish. So very much I tried to take attendees on a bit of a journey with my presentation to look at actually the different stages that a finishing animal goes through and the considerations we need to make during those stages. Obviously, we start kind of in a growth phase where we need to be thinking about how long that growth phase is and adapting the diet to kind of better meet that animal's requirements. And that'll vary depending on breed, sex, and system that they're sitting in as well. So we need to think about what's in front of us and adapt diets appropriately. So we've done a lot of chat around that stage of maturity and how we actually look at dietary changes for that. Some kind of continentally bred animals, for example, might suit going on to that more intensive finishing ration a bit earlier compared to a native animal that actually suits going through a longer growth stage. And we'll tend to find better results from that going forward. I also tried to talk a lot about transition, especially with our beef finishing systems. We have a lot of animals sold to store that are then sold through market and then bought on by finishers. So that comes with a huge transition phase. So trying to look at those conversations and having conversations about, right, how were those store animals reared? What kind of diet were they on? And trying to smooth that transition out, because that could be a potential stumbling block for efficient finish going forward as well. If they get stunted at that stage, it takes us longer to get them to the finishing, over the finishing line as such. So that was very much my focus, was really homing in on that kind of growing finishing stage and how do we optimise that for systems.
What kind of feedback did you get? What were the questions or the real concerns that farmers are putting to you, Lorna?
So some of the feedback was interesting. Some of it was just about kind of different feed systems. Being a nutritionist, I get asked about different feeds and how we can use them in diets quite often. So we got quite a lot of feedback there. There was quite a nice conversation about just how can we start bridging that communication gap in between selling stores and finish. And that's definitely something as an industry we could work on going forward. Is just, I think with a lot of things, communication's really key. If we can have a conversation or even kind of move forward to know when we're selling a store, right, they have been on a bit of cereal beforehand, or these are grass reared stores, at least that helps us go on to the next phase and smooth that transition out. And knowing, I mean, even for Fiona on a health side, for whoever's buying them, knowing what kind of vaccines or health plans they've been on beforehand is also helpful, just to smooth that transition. So I think the two main things were asking about different feed systems, which is always going to be the case. We had done a bit about forage quality, and then definitely communication. How do we improve that message going forward?
So interesting. And Fiona, you've obviously two hats, you've said there, about the veterinary side and the performance coaching side, which I know you really delved into on the day. Can you share a bit about your session?
Yeah, I was a bit more big picture, and basically my aim of the day was just to give farmers a bit of food for thought and hopefully get them going home thinking. So we started off by thinking about the goals and what their goals were in farming, where they were heading in the next 10, 20, 30 years, because it's a long-term game, farming. So thinking about where they were going, how that fitted in with market demand, and how were they meeting things and profitability, and then how they communicated that to their team and their family and the people on the farm, just so that there was a kind of knowledge of direction of travel, because that direction of travel will impact how they make decisions and what they do on a day-to-day basis. We then had a little think about health planning with just in a different way. Quite often it's a bit of paper that lives in a drawer, gets brought out once a year for the vet to review and goes back in the drawer again. And I think if we pull on and lean into that performance planning side of things, it needs to be a bit more of a flexible, dynamic thing. It needs to be really specific to an individual farmer and his goals, and his situation, his farm in particular, the challenges he has. And that can vary massively from farm to farm, what those challenges are. But that's that farmer's reality, and planning for that and thinking about those challenges can be really beneficial. So we had a little chat about what I've called a pre-mortem health plan, where you sit down a few times a year and think forwards about the things that possibly could happen. So things like dry weather and a shortage of forage. It could be risks of buying in cattle, and mixing those kind of groups of cattle. It could be labour shortages, potential labour shortages. Farmer's wife working really hard on the farm falls pregnant, you're down a person for a little while. So all these things that could happen, then identifying these kind of high impact, high likelihood ones, because they're the ones that are going to really cause you a problem, and then thinking about the mitigation we could put in for those high input, high likely things. So how could we reduce either the likelihood or the impact, or both? So we had a little chat around a whole load of things that could happen on farm. And then from that kind of conversation, it's likely that farmers will pick on a few things that they don't know how to solve, they don't know how to mitigate against, that are in the high likelihood, high impact category, and think, oh, I'm a bit stuck, I don't know what I need to do about that. And that leads to conversations with experts. And that, to me, should be your health plan, is a sit-down chat with your vet, with your nutritionist, with your agronomist, whoever you need, to pull in those expert bits of how do I solve my big problems. So it's very much led by the farmer, his problems, his situation, and then pulling in the expert kind of really strategically into what they need at any point.
I think that pre-mortem planning, what a great idea. I think it's a conversation we always come back to, this idea that the health planning happening only once a year. So I think quite an important message to be integrating those conversations, customizing it to those farm systems. Lorna, I'm going to come back to you because, like I've said already, we're speaking, it's the 16th of March just now. And by the time this goes out, we're going to be really getting towards the end of lambing and calving. So often when I've spoken to you before, and a lot of people, you're known for giving that pre-lambing and pre-calving nutritional advice. But we're past that, Lorna. Now we're looking way further on into the year. What sort of front of mind that you're focusing on just now?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, calving and lambing is definitely in full swing. If my last couple of weeks have to go by and what I've got coming towards me in the next week, anyway. But I think thoughts really turn at this stage to actually where do we take stock post that period? So into lactation, into the summer, and actually start planning for the winter ahead as well. It might seem like we're at the start of the year, but silage time's upon us. And if we don't start planning now, we're really going to have to work with shortfalls in the back end. And that's where our challenges really come. That's our major pinch point in the whole system. It's a bit of a sit back. As soon as the busyness of lambing and calving's over, we really do need to sit back and reflect as businesses, think about where our pinch points are and how do we better manage stock going forward to try and mitigate them and make them less of a pinch and less of a challenge. Heading into kind of later spring, early summer, we need to think about how's grass growth growing. We had quite a shortage of grass last year in 2025, with a really, really dry spell. This year, we've started the year with some relentless wet weather, which also impacts forage availability. So thinking about how much forage have we got in front of us, how are we stocking that, our management of that forage, do we need to think about infrastructure to be able to manage that forage differently? So do we look at rotational grazing systems? Can we look at strip grazing systems? What suits us to make sure we're building a wedge? And that wedge is probably one of the most important things we can build with grazing, because it means that we've got extra grazing available for silage making in the back end, which it really helps if we can build a good stock of good quality winter forage as well. But then also just planning other resources. Lactation's a challenging time for all animals. They're coming into their period of highest requirements, really. Like there's no animal Once they're pregnant and go into lactation, that is where their requirements for nutrition will peak. So we need to make sure that that's all in front of them, especially so cattle post-calving, they're going into peak lactation, and about the same time as they peak lactation, we're also introducing a bull and expecting them to get back and calve again. So keeping that animal in a good plane of nutrition so she can do that all will actually impact our year-long profitability and efficiency of that animal too. So if we've not got enough grazing in front, we need to plan ahead. We need to think about what else. We need to consider supplementation or another way. And we also need to think about our decision making going forward as well. So we can wean earlier if necessary, but keeping a monitor on stock performance. So how well are ewes or cows milking? How what is calf and lamb growth like? How is that animal holding its body condition? So how's the mother holding body condition going forward? And if some of those are starting to struggle, we need to think about another option or what else we can do to mitigate that. And that helps going forward to support Fiona's end as well with the health side. If we have a healthy animal in a good plane of nutrition and they're getting back and calve and rearing good lambs, and whether it's a cow or a sheep, it helps going forward right the way through. So yeah, thinking ahead, planning, being as dynamic as possible with decision making. I think we're sitting at that.
It's amazing hearing both of you really taking that long-term view on things, and I guess we can be quite guilty in farming of being quite short-term in the way that we are planning. But listening to that, I mean, you've pointed out so many different things that farmers can be thinking about in terms of their pasture and planning, and potentially looking at infrastructure and early weaning. There's so many things, Lorna, to really to mull over there. If someone's listening and just thinking where to begin at this stage in April, what's the sort of early thing that they can be doing to really get ahead and get these things sort of align?
I think earliest things in April we can look at is just monitor our grazing availability. So I say a sword stick could be one of the easiest things to be your best friend. I appreciate that not everybody's going to carry one about. So it is just kind of keeping an eye on grazing availability. Do you know, a wellie can work just as well sometimes. And even, do you know, if you put a can, like a Coke can, or like just a can of fizzy juice in grazing, ideally we want to be grazing between 4 to 8 centimetres. That Coke can standing is 8 centimetres high. If that completely hides, we've probably let the grass go a bit too further. But if that Coke can's on its side rather than standing up, and it's still visible, our grazing's probably too short. So it doesn't need to be complicated. So just starting monitoring grazing availability and starting to look at monitoring stock performance. So cow and ewe nutrition condition and lamb and calf growth.
Amazing. Some really great advice in there, Lorna. And yourself, coming to you, Fiona, in terms of you just giving some advice around the months ahead, what are the sort of main pointers we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think the more longer I do this job, the more I realise kind of nutrition and health tie in just so closely to each other. So generally the problems we see is when the nutrition has struggled a little bit, there's been a little bit less lactation, a little bit poorer growth, and then those animals become a bit more susceptible to disease. So everything that Lorna said, get your nutrition right. Certainly when things get challenging sheep-wise and lamb-wise and lamb growth-wise, once the lactating period is kind of waning at about kind of 6 to 8 weeks old and these lambs are starting to intake grass themselves, and they're reliant on themselves, yes, we're looking at grass availability. The other big challenge we get with lambs is parasite challenge. And depending on the year, so this is when we're coming back to this kind of dynamic thing, depending on what the year does, how wet is it, how dry is it, what's the sward length like, all impacts how much of a challenge these lambs get from their pasture. And then on top of that, their body condition then impacts their ability to resist that parasite challenge. So this year, you know, forage qualities have maybe been a wee bit low, sheep are maybe a little bit under condition or just in challenge at lambing. And when that happens, they have a much bigger periparturient rise, and that's the increase in worm egg output onto a pasture. So if your sheep are under strain, they're going to put more worm eggs out onto the pasture. They're going to hatch in the lovely warm spring weather, a little bit of rain to wash them out of the pats onto the pasture, and we've got the perfect kind of conditions for some really serious kind of parasite challenge. And we'll think about nematodirus in young lambs, but if we get the right spring, that can be alongside the other strongyles that can challenge them, and they can hatch really early and get going, especially if we've had a big periparturient rise. So that's in the worst years, we can get a nematodirus challenge alongside a strongyle challenge, and that can really knock our kind of 6 to 8 week old lambs. So be on the lookout for that. Beyond that, the more worms the lambs have, the more worm eggs they're putting out onto the pasture, and the more general challenge goes around. So if it's wet, if it's warm, ideal parasite number building weather. And then if you add into that a short sward for whatever reason, if there's not enough grass around, they're grazing down to those higher larvae concentration bits of the grass. They like being kind of buried at the bottom of the grass sward. So if we're short of grass, then we can increase the challenge as well. And that's another argument for early weaning. We can pull those lambs away from that high challenge grass onto some cleaner pasture. So it's a double win for early weaning sometimes, depending on the year. Cattle-wise, again, parasites are a problem. We see lungworm. I'm up in the northeast in Aberdeenshire, not traditionally a very lungwormy place, but we've seen a bit of trouble with lungworm in wet years, in recent years. So that's something probably to be aware of if you're not in a lungworm area. Be a little bit flagged up. Fluke is generally a bit of a later challenge in the season, but it certainly should be on people's radar, especially if there's wet areas on the pasture. And we do, I work in the vet lab, so I only see the disasters, I only see the dead animals. And we do see kind of ongoing summer pneumonia challenges, and we do see a bit of pneumonia at pasture. So kind of be aware of that. If you do get any calf deaths, probably to investigate it would be really useful. Is this a pneumonia problem that has reared its head because of like a 4 to 6 week old pneumonia that's kind of recovered and relapsed? Or is there something else going on? Pneumonia is generally a disease. We think of it as a kind of respiratory disease, but it's more of a disease of stress. And so if you're putting these animals under stress for any reason, and sometimes that stress can be a really good going growth rate, that's actually, you're pushing an animal pretty hard and putting a bit of stress on the system. So it's sometimes why the best animal in the park falls down dead, because that's the one that's under, in inverted commas, stress. So thinking about that, thinking about how you're mitigating that, how you're decreasing stress, so not mixing groups, not, if they're moving regularly, not running short, not giving them nutritional stress, being short of grass, all these sorts of things kind of play into disease.
And I guess what I was asking Lorna, I'd sort of put to you as well, what are early wins that farmers can do? Obviously, you've sort of talked about a few different areas within beef and sheep, but what are sort of early wins for this time of year when they're listening that they can be doing, Fiona?
Yeah, it's difficult because it does come back to kind of planning, mitigation, knowing what could be over the hill, knowing the warning signs of what that thing could be, and reacting to it as best you can with the situation you've got available to you. So that could be things like really monitoring your lamb flock for signs of kind of scour. Nematodes, they get kind of thin and empty looking, they scour, and if you don't catch it in that day or two when they're doing that, you've then got a handful of dead lambs on your hand. So being really switched on, looking at the Scops website for the nematodirus forecast to know when the hatching is going to happen, know how those coloured dots on the map relates to your farm, particularly when you see a problem compared to when the dot colours change. From a sheep point of view, being on the front foot, knowing what could happen, and doing your best to navigate that with the resources you've got available to you. And then on the calf front, thinking about, the main challenges to calves are growth, nutrition, grass availability, their condition of their mums, lactation of their mums. So kind of comes back to what Lorna is talking about. But again, knowing what's there, knowing which could be your potentially lungwormy pasture, and just avoiding that at the risky time of year. All of these things, just looking ahead, thinking what could happen, and doing your best to manage those things.
Amazing. I mean, there's just such strong advice in there from both of you and some really practical things farmers can be doing as well. I'd love to spend the last few minutes of time just asking you both a bit about looking ahead to, I mean, you're both talking a huge amount about sort of long-term planning and things we should be doing. But if I was to ask you both what success looks like for beef and lamb in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe I'll come to you first on that one, Lorna.
Yeah, Claire, that's a big question. So I think for me, success for beef and lamb in the next few years, obviously, it's been no secret. We've seen numbers, especially like mature using cattle, we've seen numbers dropping. So for me, I think success will be to see those numbers start to recover a wee bit more. I think profitability is utmost importance, and then that's going to be what drives recovery for a lot of businesses. So seeing businesses get a chance, become profitable, able to like look at their system and optimize how efficiency works in their system specifically is probably our biggest opportunity for success going forward. So it's thinking about what works for their system, what animal on their system is the most profitable and gives us back the biggest win to allow growth, to allow investment back into the industry. And that's where we're going to see success. If we look at other countries, like we are seeing constrictions, but we're also seeing improvements to carcass weights and performance. So efficiency is definitely something we're pushing forward. But with efficiency, we need, with that comes the whole story of the wider picture of, you know, an efficient system is something that's using as much as it can from the core, from the roots that we've got. So from, I kind of like to look at a farm, and if you've got a farm that's got really good grass growth or has some arable acreage, so those are the farms where feeding a bit more grain is probably worthwhile because we've got that as a resource. Whereas we've got other farms that aren't able to grow grain another or outwinter, and then they're farms that are needing to make different decisions. So it's looking at our system as a whole. What makes that efficient? What makes us successful and profitable to be able to invest? And that's where we're going to see success in beef and lamb, in my view, anyway.
Amazing, Lorna. And the same question to you, Fiona. What does success look like for beef and lamb in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's cheating just to say what Lorna said, but very much I think we share the kind of same thoughts. I mean, it's really difficult because farmers an awful lot of the time feel like they are don't have much control over their own destiny with weather and markets and these sorts of things. But I think there's definitely scope. When you look at the more kind of the successful farmers that are really making a go of it, they've looked at their system. They look at, as Lorna says, what works in their system, and have set themselves some goals and had some ambition, and really worked intentionally on improving their flock, their herd, to really work the best it possibly can on their system and work quite intentionally, and looked at ways that they can mitigate risks and manage problems that could be coming forward. So for me, it is making sure that what you're doing on your farm is what the market wants. You're doing it as best you can. You are thinking holistically about the system. One mistake I often see people make is overstocking. They think more animals, more profit, but you then bump up into the nutritional constraints on a difficult year. And I think just the long-term impacts of kind of being in that space of really struggling to meet the demands of your animals can be a problem. Sometimes the answer is just reducing the numbers a little bit, giving you a little bit more wiggle room. So thinking about those sorts of things on your farm, what could I do? What could I try to avoid the problems that I'm seeing this year? And really looking after your animals nutritionally makes them healthy, makes them less at risk of disease. So yeah, those kind of bigger pictures. So I've waffled, I understand, but yes, being proactive rather than reactive as far as you can, making sure you're meeting market demands and making sure what you're doing fits the system that you have as best you can, and pulling in that expert advice to help you do that where required.
Amazing. And I think you've echoed your point there from the start, Fiona, about being proactive, having those pre-mortems in a way as well, and just thinking much bigger picture about what's happening and integrating so many of those things. Lorna and Fiona, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. So many of your messages and advice today, real golden nuggets in there, and just aligned in so many levels. Of course, nutrition and animal health being so closely aligned. But thank you both so much for your time and for sharing with our listeners today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen for more monthly episodes as we continue to explore the vital topics affecting the red meat industry. If you want to stay updated with the latest news in our sector, be sure to sign up for the weekly QMS newsletter by emailing info@qmsscotland.co.uk. Join us next time for more insights from experts, farmers and industry leaders. But until then, stay connected with us on our social channels and keep up with the latest news from Quality Meat Scotland.